Magnus Erlendsson, Earl of Orkney, sometimes known as Magnus the Martyr and later as Saint Magnus, lived from 1080 to the 16th of April, 1117. The year of his death is sometimes said to be 1115 or 1118, but 1117 seems to be most widely accepted. Magnus served jointly as Earl of Orkney with his cousin Haakon until the two fell out. Haakon subsequently betrayed and murdered Magnus, who later achieved sainthood and was commemorated by the building of St. Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall. Magnus's grandfather was Thorfinn Sigurdsson, also known as Thorfinn the Mighty and Earl Thorfinn. He had twin sons, Erland and Paul, who after Thorfinn's death went on to serve as joint Earls of Orkney. In 1098, King Magnus Erlendsson of Norway took possession of Orkney and replaced Erland and Paul as earls with his illegitimate son Sigurd. Later that same year, Magnus and his cousin Haakon accompanied King Magnus Erlendsson on a Viking raid on Anglesey in Wales. Haakon appears to have acquitted himself well during the Battle of Anglesey Sound, but Magnus, by now a man of considerable piety, refused to fight and was judged to be a coward by the Norwegian king. As a result, Magnus had to take refuge in mainland Scotland. He returned to Orkney in 1105, where his cousin Haakon had been appointed Earl of Orkney. An appeal to King Eystein I of Norway, who had succeeded Magnus Erlendsson in 1103, saw Magnus appointed as joint Earl of Orkney alongside his cousin Haakon. Things seemed to have gone well until 1116, when the supporters of the two cousins fell out. The two sides met, and it was agreed that in order to avoid all-out civil war, the two earls would meet each other on the island of Anglesey after Easter, each bringing only 2 ships of supporters. The two sides would fight it out, and the winner would become the sole Earl of Orkney. Magnus duly arrived on Anglesey, with 2 ships, only for Haakon then to turn up with 8 ships full of warriors prepared to support his cause. Magnus hid on the island overnight, but the following day was captured by Haakon's men. Magnus offered to accept exile or prison, but Haakon's supporters wanted to ensure that there was no chance he would ever return to challenge Haakon again. It was decided that Magnus should be killed. Haakon's standard-bearer, Ofiger, refused to execute Magnus, and Haakon made his cook Leifolf kill Magnus by striking him on the head with an axe, though only after Magnus had prayed for the souls of his executioners. Magnus was buried where he had been killed. The place then miraculously turned into a green field. Magnus was subsequently reburied at Christ Church at Bursay, on Orkney's mainland, built by his grandfather Thorfinn. This has since been replaced by St. Magnus Church, which became the final repository of his relics. A renovation of the cathedral in 1919 uncovered a box with the skull of St. Magnus within. Tale of Magnus's sanctity soon spread, as well as tales of miracles at his tomb. William the Old, Bishop of Orkney in the 12th century, spoke condescendingly about miracles attributed to Magnus and was subsequently struck blind until receiving his sight again after praying at St. Magnus's tomb. Since his death, St. Magnus has been venerated as a martyr, but his status as a martyr has been questioned. Magnus's canonization was done locally, prior to the institution of canonical procedures by Pope Alexander III. It is difficult to see in what sense St. Magnus was a martyr. The occasion of the hostility of Haakon was not the practice of the faith or the defense thereof, but in a dispute over the rightful possession of the earldom of Orkney. Magnus certainly was pious and saintly, even praying for his persecutors before his execution, but it is difficult to see how his death itself was a martyrdom in the proper sense. Magnus's nephew, Ragnvald, became Earl of Orkney in 1137 and promised to build a stone minster at Kirkwall in memory of St. Magnus. The original church comprised the choir of today's St. Magnus Cathedral, and on its completion, St. Magnus's remains were brought from Bursay and interred in a column. After his death and subsequent sainthood, St. Ragnvald was also interred in the cathedral. During extensive restoration work in 1919, a skeleton was found behind stonework whose skull carried a wound consistent with the axe blow said to have killed Magnus. Ragnvald's bones had been found and reinterred during earlier work on the building in the 1800s.